Usually when we talk about treating something like stress or anxiety, there's this expectation of clinical precision.
Right, like it's a math problem.
Exactly, yeah. It's like engineering. You have a headache, you take a specific pill, the chemical blocks a specific pain receptor in the brain, and the doctor just points to a physiological chart and says, "There's the fix. We found the broken pipe and we patched it."
Yeah, and I mean, it is incredibly comforting to view human suffering through that mechanical lens. We want our problems to be visible, right? To be perfectly categorized under a microscope.
Oh, totally.
And we desperately want our solutions to come in a neat, easily understandable blister pack. Just action and reaction.
But then you step into the world of human consciousness and you start dealing with this deep existential overwhelm, the kind of chronic, low-grade stress that modern life just bakes into our bones from the absolute moment our alarms go off.
Yeah.
And suddenly, that clean engineering approach just completely shatters. We're looking at a psychological landscape that is murky, complex, and honestly, totally resistant to a quick fix.
It really is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, the mind cannot be repaired with the same tools we use to repair a broken femur. And that is the exact tension we're heading directly into today.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we have a mission that might, honestly, fundamentally alter the way you process your reality.
Yeah, no pressure.
Right. But seriously, we've been looking through a massive stack of sources. You sent us historical analyses, linguistic breakdowns, and most importantly, the clinical notes and translations from Dr. Sant Chayed-Silp.
Yes.
And we're taking all of this material to explore one of the most profound texts in human history, which is Chapter 1 of Laozi's Tao Te Ching. But, and this is the key, we are doing it through a highly specific, unexpectedly modern lens.
And that specific lens is what elevates this from, just a history lesson to an actual survival guide. For those unfamiliar with the material in the stack, Dr. Sant Chayed-Silp is a medical professional. He's a former cardiac surgeon, actually.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. He spent decades physically repairing human hearts. But over time, he observed that surgical interventions they were really only addressing the manifestations of a much deeper problem.
Just treating the symptoms.
Exactly. He saw that chronic stress, anxiety, and the relentless pressure of modern life were physically destroying his patients. So he shifted his focus toward psychospiritual health, mental well-being, and mindfulness. And he took this ancient Chinese philosophical text and translated it using modern psychological and medical frameworks.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to me, it is incredibly exciting that a text written thousands of years ago holds the exact blueprint for surviving today's incredibly stressful, information-overloaded world. I mean, we are living in an era where you are bombarded by thousands of messages, expectations, and stressors before you even finish your morning commute,
Absolutely.
And here we have this ancient philosophy decoded by a modern cardiovascular surgeon offering a literal lifeline.
What's fascinating here is how Dr. Sant uses his medical background to turn what could be very abstract, almost mystical poetry into a hard, practical tool for the listener. The core theme we are going to be tracking today is a fundamental psychological tension.
Right.
It's the friction between what Dr. Sant calls fabricated thoughts, which is basically the busy, chaotic, overanalyzing state of our modern minds, and the original state of nature, the uncorrupted baseline of human consciousness.
So for you listening right now, if you have ever felt overwhelmed, burnt out, or just completely trapped by the expectations of your job, your social media feed, or honestly your own relentless internal monologue, this deep dive is going to offer a completely new framework.
It really is.
But before we can even begin to understand the universe, or even our own minds, we have to start by auditing our primary tool for navigating the world, language.
Right.
And according to Laozi, our primary tool is structurally broken.
Yeah, it is the ultimate paradox to open a philosophical text with. I mean, you sit down to read a book about the universe, and the author's very first point is that books cannot explain the universe.
Yeah, it's brilliant. The opening line of the Tao Te Ching, Chapter 1, is famously translated as, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao."
Right.
Which immediately begs the question, if the absolute ultimate truth of the universe is beyond description, why are we even talking about it?
Right. Why not just leave the pages blank?
Exactly. Why did Laozi bother writing the remaining 80 chapters?
It is a brilliant disruption of our cognitive default. Laozi is pointing out a foundational flaw in human cognition right out of the gate. The moment you try to cage the ultimate truth, the Tao, with words, you lose its essence. We have to think about what words actually are mechanically. Words are rigid, they have borders, definitions, static boundaries, but the Tao, the fundamental reality of nature, is entirely fluid and
Okay,
boundaryless.
it's always moving.
Exactly. When you say the word water, you are not making the listener wet. You are just pointing a symbolic finger at a concept. The word is, it's like a low-resolution compression of a high-resolution reality.
That reminds me heavily of linguistic determinism. The idea that the language we use fundamentally limits and shapes what we are actually capable of perceiving.
Oh, for sure.
If we don't have the words for something, our brain struggles to see it. And Dr. Sant brings a very specific modern psychological interpretation to this limitation regarding how we live our lives today.
He does. He translates this linguistic limitation into the concept of book knowledge versus experiential truth. In our modern society, we place an immense, almost religious premium on data accumulation.
Oh, yeah. Degrees, certificates.
Right. We reward people for what they can memorize, what they can read in textbooks, and what they can recite from other people's research. But Dr. Sant highlights that this gathered, intellectualized knowledge is merely a shadow. It is not the Tao.
Right.
The Tao requires direct, unmediated personal experience.
Let me throw out an analogy here,
Okay.
because distinguishing between the symbol and the reality is so crucial for everything else we're going to discuss.
Go for it.
Relying entirely on that borrowed knowledge is exactly like going to an incredible world-renowned restaurant, sitting down, reading the menu, memorizing the exact ingredients of the signature dish, and then walking out the door genuinely believing you've eaten dinner.
Yes, that is perfect.
You can memorize the fact that a dish has white truffles, brown butter, sea salt. You can write a literal dissertation on the chemical composition of those ingredients. But the actual physical sensory flavor cannot be transferred through the text on the menu.
You have to put the food in your mouth.
Exactly. You have to taste it. So what does this all mean for how we consume information today? Because it feels like we are completely drowning in menus.
Drowning in menus is the perfect encapsulation of the modern digital age. We scroll through endless feeds of people summarizing books, giving 60-second life hacks, explaining the neurochemistry of happiness.
Right. It's all meta.
It is. We consume the data about the meal, and society rewards us for it. We get degrees, we get certifications, we get social status for accumulating this data. Lousy is warning us, and Dr. Sant is medically contextualizing for us that this relentless accumulation of descriptions actually distances us from genuine experiential truth.
We mistake the map for the territory.
Precisely.
We think, because we read a profound quote about inner peace on Instagram, we have actually achieved inner peace.
We intellectualize the concept to avoid doing the actual work of feeling it.
Wow.
If we connect this to the broader landscape of mental health, think about what happens when someone tries to solve their internal anxiety purely through intellectualizing it. They read another self-help book, they memorize another psychological framework, they learn the exact biological half-life of cortisol,
But they're still anxious.
but they are still anxious because they are still just using words to cage a fluid, deeply physical experience. Dr. Sant advocates for the terrifying vulnerability of experiencing life directly.
Yeah.
When you are feeling a complex emotion or feeling the wind on your face or sitting in absolute silence, you don't need to document it. You don't need to describe it to yourself, and you certainly don't need to post about it online.
Right, because the act of documenting it immediately pulls you out of the eternal Tao.
Exactly. It drops you right back into the fabricated world of shadows and menus.
But if words fail to capture reality so spectacularly, what are they actually doing inside our brains? Like, why did we evolve to rely on them so heavily?
Well, that leads us directly into Lauzy's next concept.
Right, if language doesn't describe the ultimate truth, its actual function is to create artificial boundaries. Words are essentially tools of division.
Yeah, the text moves right into this mechanism. It says, the name that can be named is not the eternal name.
Lousy's flashing a massive warning sign here about our human obsession with suppositions and arbitrary labels. We just cannot seem to look at anything without slapping a name tag on it.
We are a naming species, and honestly, because categorization is a survival heuristic. From an evolutionary standpoint, early humans had to rapidly label things to survive. Predator, food, poison.
Right, you don't have time to ponder the experiential truth of a tiger. You just need to run.
Exactly. The brain evolved to chop the infinite, seamless reality of the universe into distinct, manageable parts. But Dr. Sant points out how this evolutionary advantage metastasizes into a psychological trap in the modern world.
Oh, wow, so?
Because we don't just label physical threats anymore. We slap labels onto abstract events constantly. We look at a life event and stamp it as happiness or suffering. We label one colleague a success and another a failure.
But those labels are entirely unstable.
Yes.
Think about a massive disruption in your life. Maybe you got fired from a job 5 years ago. On the day it happened, you labeled it a total disaster. It was a catastrophe.
End of the world.
Right. But fast forward to today, and maybe getting fired forced you to start a business you love, or move to a city where you met your spouse. Now, you look back at that exact same event and label it the greatest blessing of your life.
Exactly.
The actual physical event of getting fired never changed. The universe just did what it did. The only thing that changed was the completely arbitrary stamp your brain put on it.
The event is neutral. The label generates the emotion. And those labels differ wildly depending on the observer, too.
Well, that's a good point.
I mean, a torrential downpour on a Saturday is labeled a ruined day by a bride trying to have an outdoor wedding. But that exact same rain is labeled salvation by a farmer whose crops are dying of drought.
The rain doesn't care?
The rain does not care. The rain is just water falling from the sky. It is nameless. The primary goal of decoding this philosophy, practically speaking for your daily stress levels, is to learn how to peel off the mask of language, to reveal that beneath our frantic naming conventions, all things are seamlessly connected in the flow of the Tao.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of that seamless connection because Laozi gets very specific about the sequence of how we corrupt our own peace. He introduces the difference between the nameless and the named.
Right.
The quote from the text is, "The nameless is the beginning of heaven and earth."
This is where Dr. Sand's modern clinical lens provides a highly actionable framework. Before there was any separation in the universe, it was a void full of what he calls pure potential.
Pure potential.
Yeah. Cosmologically, you could think of it as the state right before the Big Bang, infinite density, infinite possibilities, zero division. But psychologically, and this is the key for mental well-being, Dr. Sant likens this cosmic state to the human mind. Pure potential is the completely calm, still state of consciousness in the fraction of a millisecond before a thought pops up.
It's fascinating to view it through the lens of modern neuroscience, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like when the brain isn't actively solving a puzzle or worrying about the future, the default mode network, which is the part of the brain responsible for our internal narrative, our ego, our time-traveling worries, can actually quiet down.
Yes.
In that brief gap, your pure potential.
In that gap, there is no stress, there is no anxiety, there is no regret about yesterday or terror about tomorrow. It is just the nameless beginning. You are simply perceiving reality without filtering it. But then, inevitably, the machinery of the brain kicks in.
Which triggers the second half of Laozi's sequence. The Nate is the mother of 10,000 things.
Yeah.
The moment we define something, we shatter that pure potential and create a world of infinite fragmented parts.
From a psychological standpoint, the act of naming is the literal birth of the ego.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Let's trace the mechanics of it. You feel a sudden, tight physical sensation in your chest. In the state of pure potential, before language intervenes, it is simply a raw physical sensation. Energy moving through the body.
Just a feeling.
Just a feeling. But within milliseconds, the cognitive brain names it. It slaps the label anxiety on the sensation.
Wow.
And the moment it has a name, the ego grabs hold of it. It morphs from a sensation as occurring to, I am anxious. Suddenly, you have generated the concept of me, and me is currently under attack by this thing called anxiety.
And once the ego builds the concept of me, it has to build defenses.
Exactly.
It has to figure out who is to blame for this feeling.
You have created a hard division between yourself and the rest of the universe. From that single arbitrary label, the brain spins up an entire chaotic narrative.
Right, the snowball effect.
It goes like, I am anxious because my boss sent me a vague email, which means she hates my project, which means I'm going to miss out on the promotion, which means I can't pay my mortgage, which means I am a failure as a human being.
Oh, wow. Yeah,
What?
fall in there.
The mother of 10,000 things is the mother of your 10,000 cascading cortisol-soaked thoughts. The act of naming generates every ounce of dramatic narrative in our lives.
So let me challenge this with a practical scenario for the listener. Because, understanding the theory is one thing, but applying it on to Tuesday morning is another.
Fair enough.
I get the psychological sequence. Pure potential, a stimulus arises, we label it, the ego attaches to it, and boom, we are drowning in stress. But how does understanding the source of these fabrications actually protect you from the chaos of modern life?
Okay, give me a scenario.
All right, if I'm sitting in gridlock traffic and I'm going to be 20 minutes late for a critical presentation that dictates my career, my brain is going to label that situation as bad.
Oh, absolutely.
The cortisol is going to flood my system. How does knowing this philosophical sequence help me in the driver's seat?
It provides you with a mental circuit breaker. The sequence you just described is the fundamental engine of modern human suffering. Let's break it down. The sequence is pure potential encounters a stimulus, which is the traffic. The amygdala fires and a label is applied. This is a disaster.
Right.
Then division occurs. I am trapped, and all these other cars are my enemies. Chaos ensues, your heart rate spikes, your blood pressure rises, and your body prepares for physical combat with a steering wheel.
You pound the dashboard, you yell at someone who can't even hear you, and you arrive at the meeting already exhausted.
Exactly. But if you understand the source mechanics, you can intercept the process. Dr. Sand's interpretation suggests that when you notice that spike of suffering, you can trace it backward.
Trace it back to the label.
Yes. You look at the 10,000 chaotic thoughts about getting fired and failing at life, and you realize they all stem from the single initial label you applied to the stimulus. If you can catch your brain in the very act of labeling, if you can pause and say, my mind is calling this traffic a disaster, but physically, the traffic itself is just metal boxes resting on asphalt.
Wow. Metal boxes on asphalt.
Right. You detach from the ego's hysterical narrative. Now, you don't possess magic powers. You cannot part the sea of cars.
Unfortunately.
But you stop believing the label is the ultimate truth. You return to the nameless state, even if just for a single breath. You realize the traffic isn't conspiring against you. It just is.
That is a staggering shift in perspective.
Yeah.
It moves the locus of control entirely inside your own head. But if labels cause all this biological and psychological chaos, it raises an important question.
Which is?
Why are we so deeply obsessed with labeling everything? If slapping a name on a situation just yanks us out of pure potential and makes us miserable, what is the engine driving this behavior?
Lousy answers this by pointing the finger directly at human desire. We label things because we have an agenda. We want the universe to behave in a very specific way. Lousy says, free from desire, you realize the mystery.
Think of consciousness like a polished mirror. If you can manage to put down your rigid expectations, your cravings, your desperate need for today to go exactly according to your schedule, your mind becomes completely empty. And because it's empty, it perfectly transparently reflects the reality of nature. It reflects the mystery.
A mirror has no agenda. It doesn't judge what stands in front of it. It doesn't say, I would strongly prefer to reflect a beautiful mountain range right now rather than this overflowing garbage can.
Right, it just reflects whatever is there.
It just reflects whatever exists flawlessly and without resistance. That is the baseline of a mind free from desire. But Lousy immediately contrasts this clear mirror with the alternative. Caught in desire, you see only the manifestations.
You stop being a clear mirror and you morph into a highly distorted lens.
Exactly. When you look at the world through the lens of intense greed, fear, or a desperate need for control, your brain acts as a selective filter. You will only perceive the data points that confirm your biases or serve your immediate cravings.
You filter out everything else.
You become completely blind to the deep interconnected reality of the Tao. You only see the manifestations, the fragmented, isolated pieces of the world that you categorize as either tools to get what you want or threats to what you have.
Dr. Sand uses a really evocative environmental metaphor for this psychological state, actually. He calls desire a fog.
Fog is a brilliant medical and psychological metaphor. Think about the physical properties of fog. It doesn't alter the actual landscape. The trees, the highway, the buildings, they're all still exactly where they were.
Yeah.
But fog severely limits your depth of field. It blinds you to the broader horizon. When you are entirely consumed by the desire for a corporate promotion, you walk into your office and you are operating in a thick fog.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
You no longer see your coworkers as complex, nuanced human beings with their own struggles and families. You only see them through the narrow parameters of your ambition. You categorize them as competitors to be neutralized, allies to be used, or stepping stones to be stepped on. The fog obscures their humanity.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if we look at the architecture of the modern digital world, we have literally built multi-billion-dollar machines that intentionally manufacture and thicken this exact fog.
Oh, you mean the algorithms?
Yes. I'm talking about the algorithms powering our social media feeds, our news aggregators, and our video platforms. They are industrialized manifestation engines for our desires and our fears.
That is a profound parallel. The algorithm is the ultimate distortion lens. Let's break down the mechanics of how that interfaces with Laozi's philosophy.
Well, Laozi says, caught in desire, you see only the manifestations. Think about how a modern recommendation algorithm is coded. You scroll past 10 videos, but you linger on one video about a looming economic collapse.
Right.
You click on it because you fear it. The algorithm immediately registers that fear, which is really just the flip side of desire, the desire for security.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the machine feeds you 100 more videos exactly like it. It literally alters the digital reality you perceive to exclusively manifest your internal biases. If you're angry at a specific political group, your feed becomes a nonstop, infinitely scrolling manifestation of their worst behavior.
You were completely enveloped in the fog.
Completely. You are staring through a highly distorted lens of reality, tailored perfectly by supercomputers to trigger your specific cravings and terrors, completely blinding you to the wider, neutral truth of the world. I mean, Laozi warned us about the dangers of seeing only manifestations thousands of years ago, and we went and coded it into the devices we stare at for 6 hours a day.
We monetized the fog.
Wow. Yeah, we did.
We built a dopamine economy around keeping people trapped in the manifestations of their own desires. And that is exactly the modern crisis Dr. Sant is trying to treat. When you are caught in that algorithmic feedback loop, or even just the internal mental feedback loop of your own anxieties, you are entirely severed from the pure potential of the Tao. You are living inside a highly fabricated, deeply stressful, custom-built simulation.
So the prescription is to drop the expectations.
Yeah.
Stop demanding that reality conform to our desires, thereby clearing the fog.
Yes.
But I have to push back on this concept on behalf of the listener, because the modern Western mind really bristles at this.
I hear this all the time.
Right, because if I just drop all my desires and expectations,
Hmm?
don't I just become totally apathetic? Don't I lose my drive to improve my life, help my family, or fix injustices in the world? Does reaching the Tao mean turning into a passive blob who doesn't care about anything?
It is the absolute most common and understandable misconception about Eastern philosophy, and Dr. Sant addresses this friction very carefully. Dropping the fog of expectation is not about apathy. It is about pristine clarity.
Okay.
It's the difference between trying to violently force reality to match your ego's demands versus clearly perceiving reality as it exists and then acting effectively within it. When you don't biologically need a situation to unfold in a specific way to validate your self-worth, you can finally see the situation's true mechanics.
Walk me through a concrete example of action without expectation.
Let's use the environment Dr. Sant knows best, the operating room.
Oh, perfect.
Imagine a highly skilled surgeon. If that surgeon walks into the OR desperate for a flawless outcome because their entire ego, their identity, and their self-worth are rigidly attached to being a perfect doctor, that is a heavy, suffocating fog of desire.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure.
So if an unexpected complication arises during the procedure, biological panic sets in. Their amygdala fires. Their peripheral vision literally narrows. Their fine motor skills might degrade due to the adrenaline.
They're reacting to the threat to their ego, not just the patient.
Exactly. But a master surgeon operates with clear mirror mind. They want the patient to live, obviously. They have a goal. But they accept the underlying objective reality of the human body and the inherent risks of surgery. When a vessel unexpectedly bursts, they don't waste precious seconds getting angry at the vessel.
Right, they don't label it's unfair.
They don't label the complication as unfair. They don't worry about their reputation in that moment. They just clearly see what is manifesting in front of them, entirely free from the fog of ego-driven panic. And they smoothly, efficiently take the necessary action to clamp the bleed.
Wow.
Apathy would be dropping the scalpel and walking away. Clarity is staying deeply engaged in the work, but without the crippling cognitive load of demanding the universe, obey your ego.
That distinction changes everything. You can still play the game, you can still operate, but you aren't fighting the reality of the board.
Precisely.
And when that fog of desire finally clears, when you stop trying to wrestle reality into submission, you start to notice something truly wild about the way the universe is constructed. You realize that the things you thought were total opposites, the very things you spent your entire life either fiercely chasing or desperately running away from, are actually part of the exact same system.
Which leads us to our next major philosophical hurdle moving beyond the binary. Laozi writes, "These two spring from the same source but differ in name. The two he is referring to are the nameless and the named, or the abstract, infinite world of the Tao and the concrete physical world of manifestations.
And he's saying they aren't enemies. They are fundamentally the exact same thing.
They are the identical natural operation, just wearing different linguistic masks. The silent void of pure potential and the loud, chaotic physical world of 10,000 things are just different states of a single reality.
Hmm.
The classic analogy is water and ice. They differ in name, they differ in how they feel to the touch, they behave differently in a glass, but they spring from the exact same molecular source. They're the same substance.
And Dr. Sant highlights that to truly reach psychospiritual health, to actually lower our chronic stress, we have to overcome a cognitive habit he calls dualism.
Dualism is the human brain's obsession with categorizing the world into opposing, mutually exclusive forces, good versus bad, having versus not having, success versus failure, beautiful versus ugly.
Right, we do that with everything.
We construct these binaries to make sense of the world, but then we become prisoners to them. We spend our entire lives sprinting on a treadmill, desperately trying to stay in the good column while running in sheer terror from the bad column.
It's an exhausting way to live because it's a structural trap. You can never actually win a dualistic game because you literally cannot have one concept without its opposite. You can't understand what high is unless you have simultaneously defined what low is.
Exactly.
By creating the concept of success, you instantly, inevitably create the terror of failure. The moment you define what it means to be wealthy, you invent the fear of being poor.
That is the insidious nature of dualism. It is the root cause of so much modern psychological distress. We are essentially at war with half of reality.
Man, that's heavy.
We only want the sunshine. We want to completely abolish the rain. We only want the joy of falling in love. We want to abolish the grief of loss. But Dr. Sant points out that nature, the eternal Tao, does not operate in dualism. Nature just operates.
It just is.
The oak tree doesn't judge the freezing winter as evil and the warm spring as good. It simply participates in the cycle, shedding its leaves and growing new ones in accordance with reality.
So how on earth do we reprogram our brains to step out of that dualistic mindset?
Yeah.
I mean, it feels like trying to tell a fish to step out of the water.
It does.
Laozi introduces a concept here that sounds incredibly mystical, almost impenetrable. He calls the unified state deep and obscure, or in Chinese, the concept of swan.
Xuan is one of the most fascinating and heavily debated words in the text. It translates roughly to a deep darkness, a profound mystery, or something that is so vast and obscure it defies all comprehension.
Okay.
Laozi uses it to describe a state of truth that completely and utterly shatters human logic. It is the reality that exists beneath our neat dualistic categorizations.
But Dr. Sant doesn't just leave it as a piece of poetic mysticism. He provides a very specific psychological explanation for Swan, grounding it in how we manage our cognition.
According to Dr. Sant's interpretation, Xuan is a highly practical state of mind. It is a psychological space that you can only enter by completely letting go of active analytical thought. You cannot think your way into Xuan.
You can't outsmart it.
You cannot use logic to defeat dualism. Why? Because logic itself is fundamentally a dualistic tool. Logic requires comparing A against B. It requires categorizing, dividing, and naming. So to enter this deep mystery, to actually experience the peace of the Tao, you have to radically embrace the power of not knowing.
Okay, I have to jump in here and play devil's advocate for the modern listener, because this is where my highly educated 21st century brain violently hits the brakes.
I figured it might.
We value expertise.
Yeah.
We value data. So the ultimate goal of learning this philosophy, spending hours diving into ancient texts and modern psychology, is to arrive at the conclusion that we actually know nothing. That feels less like enlightenment and more like intellectual surrender.
I completely understand why it feels threatening. From the time we are in kindergarten, we are systematically trained to view not knowing as a moral failing, a weakness, or dangerous ignorance.
Right. If you don't know the answer, you fail the test.
We are tested and graded on our ability to know the exact right answer. But true wisdom in the context of Chapter 1 isn't about hoarding facts inside the skull. It is the profound recognition of epistemic limits. It is acknowledging that the human brain, which evolved to track animal footprints and find berries, is fundamentally, biologically unequipped to possess the infinite, ultimate truth of the universe.
So admitting I don't know isn't a defeat. It's just an honest assessment of our hardware.
Precisely. Admitting not knowing is actually the ultimate psychological relief. Think about the immense, crushing, invisible pressure you put on yourself every single day to have everything figured out.
It's exhausting.
Society tells you that you need to know exactly what the global economy is going to do. You need to know the exact perfect parenting strategy to guarantee your child's success. You need to know your exact career trajectory for the next 20 years. And you need to have the correct opinion on every geopolitical conflict.
Right. You have to be an expert on everything.
It is agonizing. It requires an impossible amount of cognitive processing power.
It's a weight that literally breaks people. You see it in burnout rates, in chronic anxiety diagnoses. We're trying to carry the burden of omniscience.
Exactly. When you finally tap into Xuan, when you genuinely embrace not knowing, you are simply aligning yourself with reality. You are standing in the deep mystery and saying, I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if this career change is good or bad in the grand scheme of the universe.
Yeah.
And that is okay, because the universe is operating exactly as it should without my management. It immediately removes the crushing burden of control. You drop the exhausting illusion that you are the general manager of reality.
That is a massive sigh of relief. Just visualizing taking off that heavy backpack of having to figure it all out creates an immediate sense of spaciousness in the mind.
It really was.
But this leads us to the final and undoubtedly the most critical section of our deep dive, the practical day-to-day magic of actually living this way.
The integration phase. How do we take ancient Chinese philosophy and Dr. Sand's medical advice into the modern world?
Because let's review where we're at if language is inherently flawed and fails to capture reality, and labels are just arbitrary illusions that cause stress, and our desires just create a blinding fog, and the ultimate wisdom is to embrace not knowing. What are we supposed to do tomorrow morning?
Right.
Does Laozi want us to abandon society? Are we supposed to quit our corporate jobs, leave our families, throw our smartphones in a river, and go live silently in a cave in the mountains?
It is the logical conclusion a dualistic mind would jump to, but the answer is a resounding, definitive no. Running away to a cave would just be creating another trap of dualism, declaring that modern society is bad and the isolated cave is good.
Right. It's just a new set of labels. So what is the ultimate psycho-spiritual takeaway here? How do we exist in the noise?
Yeah.
Dr. Sant outlines a crucial concept regarding our health, our stress, and what he refers to as the fictional world.
Dr. Sant observes, through his years of treating patients, that the vast majority of our life-threatening stress, the kind of chronic cortisol elevation that causes actual physiological damage, arterial plaque, heart disease, and chronic fatigue, comes from clinging too fiercely to things that are entirely fabricated.
Wow.
We treat social constructs as if they are biological laws of nature.
We're talking about things like social status,
Yeah.
the concept of a credit score, the definition of a successful life timeline, the idea that you have to possess a specific job title or drive a specific brand of car to have worth as a human being.
Yeah.
These aren't physics.
Yeah.
They are completely made-up fictions that humanity collectively agreed to pretend are real.
They are shared fictions. But, and this is the absolute genius of Dr. Sant's modern interpretation of the Tao Laozi, does not demand that we abandon the world of suppositions and fictions. You don't have to walk into your office and tell your boss that money is an illusion and you refuse to participate.
I don't think that would go over well.
No, probably not. Instead, the ultimate teaching is to live with the fictional world with awareness.
Live with the fictional world with awareness. That is the golden ticket. That completely bridges the gap between the monastery and the metropolis.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is about playing the complex game of modern life while fully retaining the inner awareness that it is ultimately just a game.
Right.
You can go to work, you can strive for a promotion, you can pay your mortgage, you can build a company, but you do it without the fierce, white-knuckled life or death attachment that most people suffer from. You maintain the quiet knowledge that your job title is just a temporary label on a business card. It is not your soul. It is not the eternal Tao.
It's exactly like sitting down to play a game of Monopoly with your family.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
When you play, you engage with the rules. You roll the dice, you buy the properties, you try to collect the paper money. It's fun, and you try to win. But if you roll the dice and land on a spot that bankrupts you, you don't actually have a physiological nervous breakdown,
Usually.
right? Hopefully. You don't scream and flip the table in genuine despair. Because underneath the gameplay, you possess the grounding awareness that the money is just colored paper. The board is just cardboard. Your survival is not actually on the line.
That is a flawless analogy for living in the Tao.
Hmm.
When you navigate the modern corporate digital world with that level of monopoly board awareness, your mind is allowed to flow smoothly. You remain cognitively free.
Right.
You are fully participating in the world, you are interacting with the fictions of society, but you are not psychologically bound by them. You are in harmony with the Tao because you aren't violently fighting the reality of the simulation, nor are you mistaking the simulation for the ultimate eternal truth.
Which perfectly brings us to the concluding thought of Chapter 1. Laozi describes this dual awareness living in the named world while anchored in the nameless as the doorway to all mysteries. This entire first chapter, as Dr. Sant interprets it, isn't just abstract intellectual musing. It is the absolute foundational protocol for self-training.
It is a medical prescription for a resilient mind. It's about expanding your psychological capacity to embrace every single situation, the good rolls of the dice, the bad rolls, the high points, the low points, without instantly putting up rigid resistance. Resistance to reality is what causes psychological friction, and friction is what generates the heat of suffering.
When you look at the text through this specific practical lens, it completely rescues ancient philosophy from being a dusty museum piece meant only for academics. Dr. Sand's worldview makes Laozi an incredibly effective, highly practical therapist for you, the 21st century listener.
Absolutely.
You don't need to learn ancient Chinese history to benefit from this. You just need to apply this awareness to your morning commute, to your next high-pressure meeting, or to the next time you find yourself doom scrolling on your phone.
The text is timeless precisely because the fundamental architecture of the human mind hasn't changed. We still struggle with the exact same ego-driven panic, the exact same blinding desires, and the exact same linguistic traps that humans struggled with thousands of years ago in ancient China. Chapter 1 is simply the master key to unlocking those cognitive traps.
So let's synthesize this incredible journey we've been on through this act today. Chapter 1 of the Tao Te Ching, seen through this psychospiritual medical lens, is an open invitation. It's an invitation to radically return to simplicity. It asks you to audit your relationship with language and to drop your fierce, desperate attachment to definitions and arbitrary labels.
Yes.
It asks you to notice the pure potential that exists in the silent, unmapped gaps of your mind, right before the ego wakes up and starts yelling about what needs to be fixed.
It asks you to wipe the mirror of your consciousness clean, to acknowledge and then see through the thick fog of your own desires and biases. By doing that, you can stop reacting blindly to the fragmented manifestations of the world and start living in frictionless harmony with the eternal nature of reality.
Beautiful.
You can play the intense game of the fictional world, but armed with the profound, freeing awareness of Xuan, the deep, peaceful mystery of accepting that you don't need to know everything to be okay.
It's about lowering the cognitive load of living, which leads us to a final provocative thought for you to carry into the rest of your day. We started this deep dive talking about the murky, complex waters of modern stress and our desperate desire to find a clean engineering solution to fix our anxiety.
And perhaps the solution is infinitely simpler, though radically different than the pills or life hacks we are usually sold. The next time you feel a sudden surge of stress or a wave of hot frustration about a situation in your life, I want you to hit that mental circuit breaker, pause, and ask yourself a very specific question. Are you actually upset at the physical reality of the moment, or are you just upset at the arbitrary label your brain has assigned to it? If you completely drop the name you've given the situation, does the suffering instantly disappear?
I love that challenge. Test it out in the wild today. Notice the pure potential in those tiny, empty, quiet moments of your day, just before your mind starts fabricating its next stressful narrative. You might just find the exact peace you've been looking for. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.